My name is Elijah, and like many of you, I've striven to follow God, but my journey has been marked by doubt and inconsistency. I believed, truly believed, but I often wondered if my faith was enough. I prayed, I worshipped, I read scripture, yet deep down, I feared that I was only doing enough to keep my conscience quiet rather than truly surrendering. Little did I know that even in my weakness, God was preparing me for something extraordinary, something that would shake me to my core and reveal a truth I had never fully grasped. And now, I must share it, no matter how unworthy I feel. I come from a long line of believers, people who have held onto the faith through generations of trials. My grandfather would tell me stories of his own encounters with God, his eyes filled with a reverence that I envied but never quite understood. In my community, faith was woven into the very fabric of life. Our prayers, our songs, our traditions all pointed toward God. But even in that, I sensed that something was missing. I watched as people who once burned with passion for Christ slowly became comfortable, going through the motions, their faith diluted by the distractions of the world. There was an urgency in my spirit, an ache I couldn't explain, as if something was being lost, yet I lacked the wisdom to articulate it. I wrestled with questions that no one seemed to have answers for. Was I truly living for God, or was I just another lukewarm believer, deceiving myself into thinking I was safe? And what of those around me, those who claimed faith but bore no fruit? Were we all blind to something critical? I had a moment years ago that stayed with me, though I never spoke of it. I remember standing in the back of a crowded church, watching the faces of the congregation. Some sang with genuine love for the Lord, but others, many others, looked indifferent, distracted, as if waiting for the service to end so they could return to their normal lives. My heart ached. Was this what faith had become? A routine? A cultural habit? I whispered a prayer under my breath, a desperate plea. God, show me the truth, whatever it takes. I did not realize then that prayers like that are always answered. Even as I carried this burden, life continued as usual. I worked, I laughed with friends, I struggled in moments of weakness, and I repented, only to struggle again. I thought I had time. I thought I had years ahead of me to figure it all out. But time was not mine to control. One evening, as I was driving home from a late-night prayer meeting, the world as I knew it came to a sudden, violent halt. I remember the headlights rushing toward me, the sound of screeching tires, the impact, and then silence. There was no pain, no gradual fading, no disorientation. One moment, I was gripping the wheel, my breath caught in my throat, my body bracing for the inevitable. The next, I was standing, whole, weightless, utterly aware in a way I had never been before. At first, I thought I had survived. The highway was gone, the shattered glass, the mangled metal. None of it remained. Instead, I was surrounded by a vast expanse of light, but not light as I had ever known it. It had substance, warmth, a presence that filled everything. It was not empty brightness, but something alive, something that reached inside me, knowing me completely. I turned, expecting to see my body lying somewhere, expecting the aftermath of the crash to be unfolding behind me. But there was nothing of earth here, no road, no city, just the overwhelming reality of where I now stood. And then a sound, no, a voice, a whisper that was not a whisper, but a call from deep within my soul. Come. I obeyed, though I didn't know how. My steps carried me forward without effort. I was being drawn, not against my will, but by something deeper than will itself. Each step peeled away something invisible, something I hadn't even realized was there. A weight I had carried all my life. Worry, doubt, the endless striving to be good enough. It all unraveled, falling away like old, tattered garments, until I felt free. Then I saw them. A multitude, A vast gathering of people, more than I could count, standing in the radiance of what I somehow knew was the presence of God. Their faces were luminous, filled with a joy I could not comprehend. Some of them knelt, others stood with hands lifted high. Worship poured from them not as song alone, but as something deeper, something woven into their very existence. It was as if their entire being was an offering, a declaration of love that resonated through the space around us. But not everyone was like them. To the side, near the edges of the gathering, I saw others. They were standing, their faces filled with something different, longing, confusion. Some raised their hands, imitating the worshippers, but their voices faltered. They were present, but something was missing, a distance that should not have been there. They looked around, as if searching for something, as if trying to understand why they felt out of place. I recognized some of them, people I had known, people who had sat beside me in church, who had spoken of God, who had called themselves believers. They had been good people, kind, generous, involved. And yet there was something unmistakably different about them. The light that radiated from the others only flickered in them, dim and uncertain, like a candle struggling against the wind. A grief unlike anything I had ever known gripped me. This was not a place of condemnation, yet I could feel the sorrow in the air, not from God, but from them. They knew, they understood, now too late, what had been missing. And in that moment, I did too. I turned, my heart pounding. If a heart could still pound in this place, a presence was near, not just near, but everywhere, saturating the very air I breathed, though I was no longer breathing. It was love, it was power, it was holiness so overwhelming that I felt I should fall to my knees, yet I remained standing, held up by something beyond myself. Then he spoke. "Do you understand?" I knew the voice. It was not a sound, not in the way earthly voices are heard. It was within me, surrounding me, resonating in every fiber of my existence. It was the voice that had called me before, the whisper that had drawn me forward. It was familiar, yet beyond anything I had ever known. I opened my mouth to answer, but words failed me. What could I say? How could I, in my smallness, respond to the one who held eternity in his hands? Instead, I turned again to the gathering before me, looking at the worshippers, radiant, whole, completely surrendered, and then at the others, the ones lingering at the edges, their faces filled with a sorrow they hadn't expected to feel. Yes, I did understand. The difference was not in what they had claimed. It was not in their outward devotion or their religious involvement. It was in their surrender. The true believers had given everything to God, not just their words, not just their Sunday mornings, not just the convenient portions of their hearts. They had loved him fully, with a devotion that had cost them something in the world they had left behind. The others, those on the edges, they had believed, but not completely. They had followed, but from a distance. They had loved, but not with all. There had always been something else. Comfort, reputation, fear, the approval of others that held a piece of their hearts. They had been lukewarm. And now, in the presence of the one who had given everything, they saw their mistake with a clarity sharper than any earthly pain. They had wanted both, the world and the kingdom, but the kingdom had never been something to be shared with another master. Tears burned my eyes. Could one cry in this place as I looked at them, as I recognized some of their faces? A man I had prayed with, a woman who had taught me scripture as a child, a friend who had always said he loved God but had never quite let go of the world. I wanted to run to them, to plead with them, to pull them into the radiance of worship. But something held me back. They knew. Oh God, they knew, and nothing I could say would change what was already settled in eternity. A deep sorrow filled me, unlike anything I had ever known. Not because of punishment, not because of wrath. There was none of that here. Only love, only holiness. And in that holiness, truth was inescapable. The lukewarm ones, the ones lingering at the edges, were not being pushed away. No, they were standing at a distance by their own choosing, by the choices they had made long before this moment. The realization struck like lightning. God had never rejected them. They had simply never fully chosen him. I fell to my knees. The weight of that truth was too much to bear. How many times had I settled for comfort over conviction? How many times had I pushed aside the whisper of the Holy Spirit, thinking I could always respond tomorrow? I had lived my life believing I was his, but had I truly surrendered? The presence moved, and suddenly I felt completely exposed, not in shame, but in clarity. There was no hiding here. Every moment of my life, every hesitation, every compromise was laid bare before me, not as condemnation, but as truth. I wanted to cry out, to plead, to prove that I had loved him. And I had loved him. But had I given him everything? Then, in a breath that was not a breath, in a moment that was not a moment, I saw my life from the eyes of eternity. The times I had worshipped with passion, and the times I had only gone through the motions. The times I had obeyed immediately, and the times I had delayed, negotiating in my heart. The times I had spoken boldly, and the times I had remained silent out of fear. And in that perfect clarity, I saw that every small hesitation, every moment of divided love, had mattered far more than I had ever realized. A voice, gentle yet unshakable, filled the air around me. No one can serve two masters. Tears streamed down my face. I had called him Lord, but had I lived as if he were my Lord? The presence before me radiated only love. There was no anger, no disappointment, only a sorrow for me, for what I had nearly lost. I had been so close to becoming one of those on the edges, close to standing among those who had believed but never fully surrendered. I had been spared, but not by my own doing. I trembled as I realized just how thin the line had been. And then the voice came again. Come, there is more to see. And in an instant, the sorrow was lifted, replaced by something deeper, something I could not yet comprehend. I stood, knowing that whatever came next, it would change me forever. The space around me shifted, though I remained still. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being pulled back, revealing something deeper, something more real than anything I had ever known. The radiant gathering of worshippers, the sorrowful figures on the outskirts, the overwhelming presence of God, all of it faded as a new vision unfolded before me. I was standing in what looked like a great hall, yet it had no walls, no ceiling. It stretched endlessly in every direction, filled with a light that was not merely illumination, but understanding itself. And before me, like living tapestries woven from divine fire, scenes began to unfold. I watched as the ages passed before my eyes, generations of believers, their lives intertwining with the unseen hand of God. There were those who had given everything, who had suffered and endured, not for their own gain, but because they had loved him more than life itself. I saw their moments of decision, the quiet, unseen choices where they could have turned away but didn't. Their faithfulness had not always been loud, not always recognized by the world, but he had seen it all. And then I saw others, those who had believed but had hesitated, those who had followed but had never let go of the things that bound them. They had lived with one foot in the kingdom and one foot in the world, never realizing the danger of their own indecision, the lukewarm ones. They had not rejected God outright. No, their fate had not been sealed by blasphemy or rebellion, but by something far more subtle. They had almost surrendered, almost. But something had always held them back. Fear, pride, the approval of men, the fleeting comforts of the world. And now they stood at the edges of eternity, aching to be closer, longing for what they had withheld from themselves. Not cast out, not condemned, just separated by the very choices they had made in life. I wanted to look away. The weight of it was unbearable. Then the voice came again, gentle yet unyielding. Look. And I saw my own life woven into the tapestry. Every moment of hesitation, every prayer I had delayed, every excuse I had made when the Spirit nudged me to speak, to act, to let go of something that was pulling me away from Him. I saw every time I had chosen comfort over conviction, every time I had settled for almost. I had thought I was fine, I had thought I was safe because I had believed, but belief was never meant to be passive, it was never meant to be comfortable. You were made for more. The words pierced through me, not as condemnation, but as invitation, a call to something greater than the life I had lived. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what I had seen. And then, as if the very light around me breathed, the voice spoke again, "Come, Elijah, there is still more." And suddenly the vision shifted again. The light around me swirled, bending and shifting until I found myself standing in a place unlike any I had ever known. It was vast, stretching beyond sight, filled with something deeper than silence, expectation. Before me a figure stood, not distant, not veiled in mystery, but near. So near I could feel His presence wrapping around me, filling the space between what I had been and what I was becoming. His eyes, oh, His eyes, held eternity within them. Love, power, sorrow, joy. They held me completely. I knew who He was. There was no need for introduction. Jesus. I trembled, not from fear, but because I was utterly undone in His presence. He spoke my name, not with sound, but with meaning, with identity, with everything I was ever meant to be wrapped into that one word. Elijah. My knees buckled, but He reached out, lifting me without touch. His strength was not forceful, not demanding, but absolute. I could no more resist it than I could resist the pull of the air I once breathed. "Lord," I whispered, the only word I could manage. He looked at me, into me, and suddenly I knew. Everything I had seen, everything I had felt, it had all been leading to this moment. The difference between the true believers and the lukewarm, the weight of surrender, the ache of those who had almost given everything but never fully did. It all converged into this one reality, this one question that mattered more than anything else. And He asked it. Did you love me? Tears burned my face, because I knew what He meant. Not did I believe in Him, not did I serve Him, not did I speak His name. Did I love Him with everything, with every breath, every thought, every choice? Did I love Him more than my fears, more than my comfort, more than my own understanding? I had spent my life assuming that my faith was enough, that my prayers and my worship proved my devotion. But love, true, unrestrained, unwavering love, was something more. And I had not given Him all of it. I had held back. I had let the world pull pieces of me away, convinced that as long as I still had some of my heart in His hands, I was safe. But love is not partial. Love does not settle for a portion. He never had all of me. I wept, because standing before love Himself, I realized that no excuse would stand, no justification, no self-deception. He had always been waiting for me to love Him fully, to give Him everything, and I hadn't, but I wanted to. Oh God, how I wanted to. I lifted my eyes, broken and exposed, and whispered the only thing left in me. I want to love you completely. He smiled, not with approval, not with mere kindness, but with something deeper. Something that told me He had been waiting for those words since the beginning of time. Then He reached out, and everything around me exploded in light. The light was not like before. This was not merely brightness, it was life itself, consuming everything in its radiance. I felt it rush through me, stripping away everything that was lesser, everything that had once tethered me to compromise. I expected pain, but there was none. Instead, I felt whole for the first time. Every part of me that had once hesitated, every fear, every ounce of self-preservation gone. It was as if I had been walking in a dimly lit world my entire life, never realizing how much I had been missing until now. I gasped, though I no longer needed breath. And when the light settled, I saw him again, Jesus. But something was different, not with him. He had not changed. I had. I could stand in his presence now. I no longer felt the weight of unspoken regrets, of unfinished surrender. He had burned it away, not in wrath, but in love. I had asked to love him completely, and he had answered in a way I never expected. I looked at my hands. They shimmered, not with their own light, but as if they reflected his. And then he spoke again. "You must return." My heart, if I still had a heart, shuddered at the words. Return, go back, to the world where people hesitated, where faith wavered, where distractions pulled hearts away from true surrender. I didn't want to. Not now. Not after seeing this. But he was still looking at me, and in his gaze I saw purpose. "You asked to love me fully," he said, his voice like a song woven from eternity itself. "Now you must show them how." The words settled into my being, into the very essence of what I was. I knew without question what he meant. There were so many who didn't understand, so many who, like me, had thought belief was enough, who had convinced themselves that as long as they meant well, as long as they kept some part of their hearts in his hands, they were safe. They didn't see the danger of hesitation. They didn't know how thin the line was between loving God with everything and merely believing in him without true surrender. I had stood at the edge of that line, and now I had to go back. I nodded. I didn't want to leave this place, but I wanted to obey. For the first time in my life, I wanted nothing but obedience. His smile deepened, as if he had been waiting for that decision all along. And then the light surged again. Everything rushed backward. I felt the weight of my body return. The air was heavy, thick. There was pain, the sharp sting of brokenness. I gasped, this time for real, and my eyes flew open. I was back, alive, and nothing would ever be the same again. The world felt impossibly distant now, as if the earth itself had become a shadow of what I had just witnessed. I blinked, disoriented, my senses scrambled by the sudden return to a body that had once been my own. But it no longer felt like it was truly mine. I could feel the weight of my old life pressing against me, the familiar heaviness of things I used to care about, the trivial struggles, the distractions, the comforts I had once held close. They all felt so insignificant, so empty now, like relics from another life. I looked around, trying to gather myself, and the reality of my return settled like a weight in my chest. I was back in the world I knew, but everything was different. I had been changed, utterly transformed, and yet the world still spun in its slow, familiar rhythm. The faces I knew, the places I had walked, they were all the same, but I was no longer the same. The weight of the mission he had given me pressed against me like a mantle I could not deny. I'd seen the difference, the great divide between those who truly loved God and those who simply went through the motions. I'd seen the devastation of the lukewarm, those who had believed but never fully surrendered, who had lived for the world and God at the same time, never knowing the cost of indecision. I had to do something about it. I couldn't simply go back to my life, go back to pretending things were the same. There was a truth that I now carried, one that could not be hidden. There was no way I could keep it to myself. I had seen too much, understood too much, felt too deeply. But as the hours passed and I found myself once more in the ordinary world, walking through the mundane streets, hearing the familiar sounds, feeling the same heartbeat in my chest, a wave of doubt began to creep in. Would they believe me? Would they understand? I had no words that could fully capture what I had experienced. How could I explain the overwhelming love, the radiant light, the absolute clarity I had felt in that divine presence? How could I convey the agony of witnessing the lukewarm souls who had only come close to him, but had never truly given everything? How could I ask anyone to see what I had seen? But the voice, the same voice I had heard in the presence of God, spoke again. "Speak, Elijah. You have seen the difference. Now you must tell them." And in that moment, I realized something even more profound. I had been given a privilege, not just a command. The weight of it was still heavy, yes, but it was not a burden. It was a gift. A calling that would allow me to share the very love I had felt, the very truth that had been revealed to me. I could no longer remain silent. I had to go, not in fear, but in faith. I had to share what I had seen and what I had experienced because I knew, without question, that the world needed to hear it. The world needed to understand that faith is not a passive thing. It is not a routine. It is everything. It is a full surrender to the one who gave everything for us. I had to tell them about the difference between those who claim to believe and those who truly love. And I knew, deep within me, that whatever came next, God was with me, not just beside me, but within me. I began my journey back into the world with a sense of urgency I had never felt before. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold or what people would say when I shared what I had seen, but the weight of the calling burned in my chest. I no longer had time for hesitation. I started with the people closest to me, the ones I had shared years of my life with, the friends I had prayed alongside, the ones I had called family. I didn't have eloquent words. I didn't have all the answers. But I spoke with a clarity that only came from the truth I had seen firsthand. I told them about the difference, about the line I had stood on, uncertain of which side I truly stood. I told them about the radiant worshippers, those who had given everything, who loved God with every breath, every step. And I told them about the lukewarm, those who, like I had once been, had stood in the shadows of faith, believing but never fully surrendering. Some listened, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some were moved, their hearts stirred by something deeper than my words. But others, many others, only heard the story as a warning, as an uncomfortable truth they weren't ready to confront. They nodded politely, murmuring words of sympathy, but I could see it in their eyes. The distance. The distance between the world they knew and the truth I had seen was a chasm. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them slip away without at least giving them a chance to understand. I had been given the gift of clarity, the gift of truth, and I could not, would not, hide it from anyone. As I shared, I watched the faces around me change. Some became defensive, their pride rising at the suggestion that they, too, might be among the lukewarm. But others, I saw their eyes begin to soften, to stir with a longing I recognized. A hunger for something real. I began to understand then, this wasn't just about sharing a story. It was about calling them to a decision, a choice. The same choice I had been given in that heavenly realm. The choice to love God completely, to surrender not just part of your life but everything. To stop living for both worlds and instead give Him the fullness of your heart. There was no easy answer, no quick fix. But there was a choice that could change everything. And as I spoke, I realized that God had already prepared the way for some to hear. Not everyone would listen, but some would. Some would feel the pull of the Holy Spirit, the same pull that had drawn me to that heavenly place, and they would understand. They would begin to see the difference for themselves. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt discouraged, when I faced rejection, when I questioned whether my words had any weight at all. But every time I started to doubt, I remembered what I had seen. I remembered the truth that burned in my heart, and I pressed on. And the more I shared, the more I began to see small signs of change. People began to ask questions. They began to seek deeper understanding. Some reached out in quiet moments, asking how they could love God more fully, how they could surrender their hearts completely. I realized then that my journey was just beginning. The mission he had called me to wasn't one that would end with a single conversation or a single testimony. It was a lifelong commitment, a calling to help others see the difference, to show them that the path to true love for God isn't a vague ideal, but a very real, very specific decision to give everything. And as I walked this new path, I knew, without a doubt, that I was not alone. I had returned to the world, but I was no longer of it. Each step, each conversation, each moment of sharing what I had witnessed felt like a divine echo, a resounding call that carried me forward. The days that followed were filled with challenges, moments of resistance, and the steady pull of doubt. But there was also a quiet strength, an unshakable sense that I was walking in the purpose God had set before me. Some days were hard. Some days the world felt like it was pulling me back, tempting me to forget the urgency, to grow complacent again. But then I would think of what I had seen, the faces of those standing at the edges of the heavenly realm, the sorrow in their eyes, the deep longing in their hearts, and I knew I couldn't stop. There were times when I saw others on the same path I had once walked, wrestling with their own struggles, their own hesitations. I would share with them the truth I had been given, and though many didn't understand, some did. I saw the same hunger in their eyes that I had once had, and I knew that if I could help them see the difference, the true difference between half-hearted belief and full surrendered love for God, then I had fulfilled my purpose. It was not an easy road. It never would be. But there was a peace that came with knowing I had a part to play in God's greater plan. And that peace carried me even through the difficult moments. The truth that had been revealed to me wasn't just a message, it was a life-changing reality. It was a call to action, a call to live with everything for God, to choose Him completely, to love Him fully. And as I continued to share, I began to see how God's love was transforming lives around me. Slowly but surely, hearts began to change. The lukewarm ones started to awaken. Some surrendered completely and others struggled, unsure if they were ready to lay down everything. But in every heart there was the spark of possibility, the spark of true faith. I realized that I wasn't just sharing a message. I was sharing an invitation to experience God's love, not in part, but in fullness. An invitation to step into a life of uncompromising devotion, where nothing else mattered but loving Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I knew deep in my spirit that this was only the beginning. The difference between those who simply believed and those who truly loved God was a difference that would echo through eternity. It was a difference that would shape the world, one heart at a time. With every person I spoke to, with every truth I shared, I felt God's presence beside me, within me, leading me forward. The mission was clear, to reveal the difference, to help others see the path of true faith, and to live it out every single day. Because the world needed to know, it needed to see the difference. And I was chosen to show them.